So 50% of the habitable landscape is now converted over to farmland. And 70% of that is basically for cattle or for the feed to feed cattle. So only 30% for cereal crops. Now, as a scientist, I can tell you that between the grass and the cow, 90% of the energy is lost. So that is not an efficient way of farming. In no way whatsoever. It's a very, very inefficient way of farming. And in the UK, 73% of the land is now given over to agriculture. I defy you to take me anywhere in the UK landscape and show me a natural landscape. And if you think going to the Lake District or North Wales is a natural landscape, no, it isn't. It's been completely deforested, it is completely degraded. And I do agree with Natalie on this point. Our landscape is very, very severely depleted.
I mean, it kind of begs the question, doesn't it? So you say this and, it's a very human reaction to say, gosh, that's terrible, and what can we do about it? But I feel like the implication in what you're suggesting is that we should go back, right? How to rewind effectively, to undo all these kinds of things. But I mean, is that what you're saying? And also, does that involve us all having to go back to farming and feudal life? Or how does this look?
No, what we do is we take lots of the knowledge that we've lost and we've forgotten and combine it with our modern understandings. So a great example of this is there's a book called Miraculous Abundance, which is written by the farmers in Farm Bec Elouine in Normandy in France. And they take 1,000 square metres of land, and that produces from one person's labour, fruit and vegetables, enough to produce a rural French income of 22,000 euros a year, which is a very good rural French income. It produces huge quantities of fresh fruits and vegetables. It works on permaculture and agroecological principles, is organic. And so what it does is it uses knowledge. A lot of this knowledge comes from historically the market gardeners around Paris 100 years ago used to do things like they had a lot of manure from horses then. They produced tomatoes in March and April in Paris by using that heat. This is all knowledge and skills, and what we need is far more science, far more understanding. We're now coming to, farmers 100 years ago understood that you had to look after the soil. There was a 1930s Italian proverb that said, artificial fertiliser is good for the father and bad for the son. They understood that applying that fertiliser was trashing the soil. We lost that knowledge. We recover that knowledge. We combine it with our understanding now, far more understanding about soil science, about human microbiomes. This is the kind of science and understanding, agroecology, permaculture. We need new understandings, new things, but this is the science, the kind of science we need.
I mean, maybe
I'm surrounded by experts in farming, neither of whom I think farm. Farmers would probably use a more efficient system if it was available, as Natalie tells them, or as Mark tells them, but it isn't. Actually, I am a small farmer I have a small farm in France with 12 lambs and 6 sheep and 18 geese and 40 chickens on it. And it's wonderfully eco-friendly, but it's incredibly inefficient. And I think if we gave you a 100-acre farm, you would be bankrupt within 6 months. I think Mark would be bankrupt in 3 years. I would be bankrupt in about 2 months. Farmers know quite a lot about farming. Don't trust armchair farmers to tell you how to run the agricultural industry of this country. The eco enthusiast, what was his name? The chap who wrote Crash of 75, who said that the world was going to run out of food by 1975. There'd be 10 million dead by that time and so on. They eventually made him a member of the Royal Society. It was nonsense. The advances in agriculture have enabled us to feed 8 billion people with less land than we were feeding 6 billion people.
I mean, I'm also struck by the fact that, and none of you have disagreed with the use of science to optimize effectively. Again, I should disclaimer for those of you in the audience, I'm a molecular biologist, I'm a scientist as well, so I like to hear things like optimization wherever I go. But, it sounds like you're all on board with the using of technology and science to improve the efficiency of the system. Is that at least a common thread that we can find between us?
Well, I think the question is what kind of science, and what we've relied on over the past few decades has dominated our science as an extremely reductive model that's looked for silver bullets, that said, the plants, we want to get more yield, we'll throw some more nitrogen fertiliser on and that'll get more yield. without thinking about what will that do to the soil microbes, what will that do to the long-term security structure of the soil. All of those things have been short-term. And I would say, farmers now, the leading farmers now, I visited a farmer over in Shropshire, maize farmer, maize, corn, a huge problem in terms of damage to soil structure. And he was doing lots of different experiments with undercrops, with planting various legumes to protect the soil and look after. But, we keep coming back to capitalism, because he said to me, this seed, the vetch costs £20 a kilo for seed, this costs £15 a kilo, this costs £12 a kilo, and the supermarket won't pay me enough for my maize, or the cattle feed merchant won't pay me enough for my maize to actually do that. So we have a system where farmers have been forced into more and more production, and in this country in particular, we've destroyed all of the government independent agricultural extension. So it's all come from the seed companies, the fertiliser companies. That's where the information to farmers has come from, and it's wrecked our land. And if you go to the Oxford Farming Conference, you will hear more and more mainstream general farmers saying we have to change. The NFU and the Soil Association are getting closer and closer every year.
Well, splendid. If your arguments and your evidence and your science works, I'm sure scientists, as farmers, will lap it up. They want to do things that are more efficient, not less efficient. Things that will give them yield without destroying their soil, rather than things which won't give them a yield and will destroy their soil. They are not stupid farmers. The idea, however, that people who know nothing about farming, like this panel here, except for me, who in a small way I know how to lose money on a small farm, should dictate, just don't believe it. Look at what happened in the Soviet Union when politicians took over farming. The breadbasket of the world was turned into a huge importer of food. Ukraine. The massive famines took place. So just please don't, for a moment, give any credence to armchair farmers.
So if I could come in at this point, I honestly do not want to dictate to any of you what you do in your lifestyles. But if we carry on as we are at present, then you know that this is going to be catastrophic in a few generations. I think there are ways to wind back, and I think we started on this conversation with winding back, and also then we talked about technology. So technology can be part of the solution, but technology is not going to save you. You're often peddled ideas on the media that technology is going to come along and be your great salvation. So you might all decide to go and drive electric cars, for example, and that will certainly help in the near term in terms of the carbon emissions to the atmosphere, but it won't help in the long term because the same embedded problems are there. So technology is part of the solution, but you and I have to change our behavior. So I support farmers. I'm not against farmers in any way whatsoever. But if I reel off the statistics to you again, since the 1960s, meat production, meat consumption on planet Earth has doubled. It's not wonderful because of the loss of energy between grass and cow. It's a 90% loss. And the amount of energy coming in, it's a lot of energy, but the grass also struggles to fix it as well. So that's not sustainable in the long term. And I will just add to that, if we carry on, if we all decide we want a meat-rich diet like Argentina or Australia or North America, then you can kiss goodbye to all of the forests on this planet, and you can kiss goodbye to the wildlife too. But if you change your behavior, if you eat less meat, you can make a big difference. And you can allow large areas of the planet to become reforested, stabilizing the climate, stabilizing those ecosystems. You really can make a difference, but it also involves behavioral change. It's not just technology.
Mark and I are agreeing on lots of things, but I also want to stress that what we need is system change, not climate change. And it's all very well to say to people, we can't have anything like one-for-one replacement between fossil fuel cars and electric cars. But unless you make walking and cycling safe and convenient, unless you provide buses into rural areas, unless you give people an alternative that doesn't mean the train costs 10 times as much as it would to drive a car, then people it's not available to people. We have to make the environmentally sensitive, socially responsible thing to do the easiest, cheapest and simplest thing to do. So people don't have to choose, that's just naturally what you do. And that's what system change means.
I kind of want to go back to the sort of original question here, though, which is this idea that if we actually rewind back to this sort of other form of agriculture or the sort of historic way of doing things, that somehow we would end up escaping the current woes that we have in terms of status hierarchy and oppression of the modern civilization explicitly. And I feel like that's kind of a big claim, isn't it, to suggest that the entire bedrock of our society and framework of seeing the world is down to how we farm our food. And I'm obviously not an expert in this, but I'm curious as to whether or not we think that if we did make changes like that, we would actually see this radical shift in the entire fabric of our society or not.
Well, I'll start on that.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.